A Harvard graduate walks into the woods, builds himself a house for $28.12, accidentally burns 300 acres of forest, gets thrown in jail for refusing to pay a tax, and in doing so, accidentally writes the instruction manual for every major protest movement of the next 2 centuries. His name was Henry David Thoreau. Except that wasn't his name. Not really. He was born David Henry Thoreau. July 12, 1817, Concord, Massachusetts. After graduating from Harvard, where he barely passed the entrance exams, but then devoured 5,000 pages of notes, he just reversed his first 2 names, became Henry David, never legally changed it, never explained why. Nobody knows. His friends pronounced his last name Thoreau, not Thoreau. Think about that. We've been saying his name wrong for 150 years. Here's something nobody tells you about Thoreau. The man was an engineer. His father ran a pencil factory, and Henry, after studying German manufacturing techniques, invented a grinding machine that produced the finest graphite in America. This nature poet, this philosopher of the woods, made his living making pencils. And he was really, really good at it. And then in 1844, a year before he moved to Walden, Thoreau was out cooking fish with a friend in the woods. The campfire got away from them. 300 acres of Concord's forest gone, just consumed. His neighbors called him Woods Burner for years afterward. The great nature lover, the man who would write the most famous love letter to the American wilderness, burned a significant chunk of it to the ground by accident. You can't make this up. July 4th, 1845, Independence Day. Thoreau moves into a cabin he built with his own hands on the shore of Walden Pond. The land belongs to Emerson. The cabin cost $28.12. He itemized every nail, every board, every penny. He bought a dismantled railroad workers' shanty for materials. Friends helped raise the roof. And this wasn't the wilderness. It was 1.5 miles from his family's house. He wasn't escaping civilization. He was conducting an experiment. Quote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life." Look at this. A bed, a table, a desk, 3 chairs. That's it. He bathed in the pond every morning until it got too cold. He played flute in the evenings. He could summon a wild mouse out of hiding just by playing. He collected plant specimens, bird nests, arrowheads. He kept a journal, wrote in it every single day for 24 years. 2 million words. Think about that. 2 million words. And the ones most people remember are 9. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. But here's what people miss about that quote. It's not pessimism. Thoreau isn't saying life is hopeless. He's saying most people never even try. They accept the default settings. They do what they're told because they're told to do it. And he's asking, what if you just didn't? What if you actually examined what you needed versus what you were told you needed? To understand Thoreau, you have to understand Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson was the most famous intellectual in America. He moved to Concord during Thoreau's sophomore year at Harvard. And when they met, Emerson saw something. He saw a disciple, but one so self-reliant he'd never actually be a disciple. He gave Thoreau access to his library, his home, his land. That's Emerson's land at Walden, Emerson's acres. And the relationship was deep. Mentor, landlord, father figure, philosophical sparring partner. But there was a tension, because Thoreau wasn't content to just agree. He was building something Emerson couldn't. There's a personal side to this nobody talks about. In 1839, both Thoreau brothers, Henry and John, fell in love with the same woman, Ellen Sewell. Henry proposed. She said yes. Then her father shut it down. A minister who disapproved of the Thoreau family's liberal views. Henry never married, never pursued anyone else. And then, 3 years later, his brother John cut his finger. A small cut. Tetanus set in. John died in Henry's arms in January 1842. That loss, that sudden, stupid, senseless loss, haunted him for the rest of his life. July 1846. Thoreau is living at Walden, writing, thinking, bathing in the pond every morning. And then he gets stopped on his way to town. The local constable, Sam Staples, a man he knows personally, tells him he hasn't paid his poll tax. Not for 6 years. And here's the thing. This isn't an accident. Thoreau refused to pay because his taxes funded a government that allowed slavery and was waging war on Mexico. He looked at the numbers and made a calculation. His money went to buy chains. So they put him in the Concord jail. One night. That's all it was. One single night. And what does he do? He sits there. He observes. He takes mental notes. He later wrote that the cell walls seemed a great waste of stone and mortar. He wasn't suffering. He was studying. He said it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever experienced, watching his town from the inside of a cage. Seeing Concord from behind bars made him realize that the real prisoners were outside. The people who obeyed laws they knew were unjust because obeying was easier than resisting. His aunt, Maria Thoreau, paid his tax the next morning. He was furious. He didn't want to be rescued. The whole point was to stay in that cell, to force the government to explain why a man who refused to fund slavery belonged in a cage. But she paid, and out he walked. And the next morning, he walked back to Walden Pond and picked huckleberries, as if nothing happened. 2 years later, he turned that one night into an essay. Originally titled Resistance to Civil Government, later renamed Civil Disobedience. And here's where it gets wild. The argument is simple but nuclear. If a law is unjust, you have a moral obligation to break it. Not petition, not vote, break it, and accept the punishment. Because, and this is the key, under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison. Let that sit for a second. The true place for a just man is prison. But Thoreau didn't just write about injustice. He literally put people in his house. In the 1850s, he became an active conductor on the Underground Railroad, helping fugitive slaves escape north to Canada. Think about that progression. First, he writes an essay saying you should break unjust laws. Then he starts personally breaking them. Theory became practice. The philosopher became a smuggler. October 1859. John Brown raids the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, trying to arm a slave rebellion. He's captured, tried, and sentenced to hang. The entire country calls him a lunatic, a terrorist, a madman. And Thoreau, quiet, philosophical, flute-playing Thoreau, stands up in Concord and delivers one of the most incendiary speeches in American history. A plea for Captain John Brown. He doesn't just defend Brown. He consecrates him. Quote, I plead not for his life, but for his character, his immortal life. And then, when were the good and the brave ever in a majority? Now here's where one night in jail changes the world. Sometime in the early 1900s in South Africa, a young Indian lawyer named Mohandas Gandhi picks up a copy of Thoreau's essay. He's fighting racial discrimination. The laws of the British Empire say he is less than human. And he reads Thoreau's argument that conscience outweighs law. He develops an entire philosophy from it, calls it satyagraha, truth force, nonviolent resistance. He takes it back to India and uses it to topple the British Empire. Then in the 1950s, a seminary student in the American South reads both Thoreau and Gandhi. His name is Martin Luther King Jr. And King takes that same thread, conscience over law, nonviolent resistance, the willingness to go to jail for what's right, and he weaves it into the civil rights movement. The Montgomery bus boycott, the March on Washington, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. One night in a Concord jail cell, 1846. Thoreau to Gandhi to King. 118 years, 3 continents, and the thread never broke. Think about what actually happened here. A guy who made pencils refused to pay $6 in taxes and spent one night in a county jail. And that one act of conscience, that one quiet no, rippled outward across 150 years and changed the world. Not through violence, not through an army, through an idea. That one person's conscience can be a higher authority than any government. May 6th, 1862. Thoreau is 44 years old. Tuberculosis. He'd gone to Minnesota hoping the climate would help. It didn't. He came back worse. In his final weeks, someone asked him if he'd made his peace with God. He said, "I did not know that we had quarreled." That's the most Thoreau thing ever said. His last coherent sentence, "Now comes good sailing." And then, his absolute last 2 words on this earth, moose and Indian. Even dying, his mind was in the wilderness. Walden sold 2,000 copies in 5 years. Today, it's one of the most important books in the English language. His cabin cost $28. It was later used as a pigsty. He died at 44, and he's buried near Emerson, Hawthorne, and the Alcotts on Author's Ridge in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. But here's the thing nobody tells you about Thoreau. The lesson isn't go live in the woods. The lesson is examine your life. Ask yourself what you actually believe. And if your government asks you to fund something you know is wrong, you have a choice. You always have a choice. Every revolution starts with one person deciding that their conscience matters more than their convenience. One night, one jail cell, one essay, and the world changed. That's the real story of Henry David Thoreau.